Why is my screen sharing already? What? My thing one? My PowerPoint? It's a little better, Warwick, thanks.
Okay. All right. So, Brenda, just to give you a bit of house rules as what's happening, I've already streamed this across through to YouTube. The presentation that you see on the screen right now is my presentation, just to let the students know what is being done and the date, because it's being streamed to YouTube. As I said, the link for you, the YouTube is on your ECR page. So if anyone's missed this, you can direct them to that. It'll be up there. They can just watch from the beginning again. All right. I'm going to be here dealing with questions of YouTube. I see you've already got a few questions already. A few of the Musgrave students aren't able to access the webinar as it won't let them log in. So
I really need you louder, Warwick, please.
is that better?
More?
And now? Is that better? Because I'm literally speaking into the microphone now.
Okay, now that's great. I'd love to see you do that.
Okay. So Megan, please just tell your fellow students to go onto the ECR page and they can click on the link to YouTube there. All right. So Brenda and Renelle, if I'm happy to continue watching the chats and the Q&As and the live YouTube session for you. So if there are any questions, I can pass them on to you. All right.
Perfect.
Okay. Any students that are currently watching via Zoom, you're more than welcome to ask on the chats and I can pose the questions to Renelle and Brenda. However, if you want, you can click on the raise your hand button. We can promote you to a panelist so you can ask the lecturers your questions directly rather than going through a typed format.
Okay, right. Warwick, I just need to quickly interrupt there because it's only 40 minutes. It's quite a bit that we need to cover. So I'd prefer the questions to be on
held to the
chat
end.
or the Q&As. Plus, I'd also just point out that we are going to have a Q&A session specifically next week regarding this module or this topic, this unit. So it's going to be more beneficial, I think, at this point for us to keep the questions for there, but they can post them already.
All right,
so
perfect.
we can work through some of them, but it's quite a bit that I'd like to get through.
Okay. All right, Brenda, if you don't mind, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then you guys can take it away. I'm going to mute myself, but I'm here should you need me.
Okay, so I'll just holler. I'll just really holler.
That's correct.
Okay, great.
Hello, collega.
Good morning.
More. Right, guys, I think we're just waiting for one more lecturer from Gauteng. I would like to welcome Miss Markgraaf from Montana. Obviously, we're still waiting for quite a few participants. I see we're only on 42. So from 160, I'm a little concerned about that. I trust some of them are still in PJs and they'll be watching, hopefully, in a way where we're going to do practical, because you have to understand that. And I'd like to welcome as well Mrs. Human as the internal moderator for our module. Guys, I'm going to get started immediately because we've got quite a bit to cover, like I mentioned, those that might have joined earlier or on time. We've got quite a bit to cover. And like I pointed out to our LED, that we would look at the questions. He would help us with that. Both the lecturers, we're just waiting for Waterfall as well. Mr. De Como should be on hopefully shortly. All of them would also assist with questions because obviously some or our demographics actually allow us to be in a space where we experience the lessons and the learners differently. The most important thing is, however, that you must be aware we are going to be doing a Q&A next week. So I'll follow up on this. We will open completely for questions. Okay, so keep them because they're probably very important when we get to eventually assessment, not that we want to work on assessment only. Okay, then I'd like to share the screen so that we can get started. There we go. You all should be seeing that. And I'd like to, right, it takes a while apparently to just warm up, I believe. Everybody can see the screen. Do you see it in full panel? Is it full screen or part?
It's not full screen, Brenda. I think if you go to the right bottom corner.
There, no, I've got that. It should show now.
Yes,
okay. Right, guys. Like I said, we've got quite a bit to cover. And we're going to start off by exploring movements. Now, I have to point out here immediately that chapter 3 is where we're really going to pay attention to our body movements. We're going to move into the managing of the lesson more now. And remember, this is a unit that we've asked you earlier to actually have a look at so that you can see what you would have to apply in your lessons, okay? So when we look at the movements, I want to get back to them when we do movement components, because in that space, we will elaborate on how the body is going to be moving and where the body is going to be moving. If we look on page, and remember, I asked you as well to make sure that you've got your textbook, because yes, as you are dribbling in from the back of the lecture hall now and getting seated, obviously you need to catch up very quickly. On page 196 in chapter 7 of COVA is where we would then, and listen carefully, we would then compare to page 52 of chapter 3, right? So that comparison is the one that I'd really be exploring, expanding on when we get to chapter 3 later in this month. Right, but very briefly then, if you would be so kind and my Musgrave students would understand, if we're in the lecture hall now, I'd ask all of you to please get up and put your hands out and reach, and who can you touch and who can you not touch, for our personal and general space. Okay. Then also going into body shapes, you'll see I'm going to go through these rather quickly. If you look at body shapes, for example, we look at curling and tucking, and here we actually need you to understand the body goes into a movement. If you look at the curl down there and the tuck, those are distinctly different, and as a teacher, you would have to point out where and how that body would be positioned. So you would be referring to arms, back, upper body, legs, etc. Okay, and obviously, yes, it's very challenging for me to not be able to see you. It's really rather annoying to not be able to lift you up and get you going. With these body movements, we'll also explore levels, focus, size, the force and time that we use to be able to perform our movements. We look at relationships, in other words, your relation to equipment or the learner's relation to equipment and how you want them to work with equipment, but also then, of course, partners, either partners or teams. So in other words, those relationships are going to be included in any lesson. Direction, of course, and pathways. We have to know in which direction our learners are going to be moving. Are we planning our lesson field or our field layout properly to accommodate all of these? Just there are a few examples of direction, and I think this is a very playful way of looking at directions and where the learners would be moving. up and down, clockwise, backwards. Sometimes we actually just focus on left and right, back and forward, sideways. Those are our common ones that we sort of get our learners to move in. But let's refer to specific terminology as well. How about north and south? Okay, obviously then the teacher needs to be very aware of where north is and where south is from where you actually situated. If we look at the pathways, also being aware of the space around us, you'll see we can keep referring back to the space. And now, of course, from an assessment point of view, I would actually like to put out there that how did we have to accommodate all of these movement explorations in our current scenario of now being in a position where we can't touch, we can't be close together. So our personal space is huge. My question would be, how would I now accommodate my direction? I've got 43 learners. Will I be able to accommodate them in such a way that we adhere to our current pandemic situation? So yes, suddenly it sort of opens our whole look at how we would get our little ones or our learners to move. You also have to be aware that when we look at all of these, our teaching method is also going to be affected. I neglected to say in the beginning, for our time, our duration, I want to get through these movements very briefly like I did, and then we're also going to look at the teaching methods. Now, some of these might just come naturally. Some of them we have to work on and be very aware of how we're going to use these teaching methods. I'm also touching on demonstration, feedback, and supervision. Right at the end of this presentation, I've got a couple of questions as well that would be in your best interest to go through. And it would serve a great purpose if you could actually not just go through them, but try and apply them as well. Not just when you go teaching or go to your school, but when you're preparing your lesson, apply them to current situations, for example. Right. And I know there was something I was going to say about our space, our pandemic space, and getting back to the movements. I'm sure I'll remember shortly. If we look at our continuum, I think it's almost one of those duh moments, and Musgrave students would understand this because you're supposed to know, you're supposed to think about this. We're going to be teaching directly. And now I'm basically within a summary in 2 sentences going to talk to you about direction or direct teaching and indirect teaching. Now, like I said, it's one of those duh moments where when you move from the one to the next, you are also moving responsibility away from the teacher and becoming more of the facilitator than the instructor. And this is probably what I should have pointed out right in the beginning as well. Normally in between, we would be posting or asking questions all the time and getting involved. With this scenario, I'd like you to keep yourself alert and informed and think about these questions in your own space when you're doubting whichever. I'll refer to the Musgrave students one more time. They'll also understand that I never stick to the PowerPoint. Everything would be there for your reference later, but it's important for you to grasp the concept as we go along. So I'll probably get slightly sidetracked so that we can get the bigger picture. If we look at the direct instructing, obviously here, guys, you would see that the teacher it's teacher-centered. So in other words, my teacher is giving all the instructions. My teacher is deciding when the learner would be participating, how, where, and also with who. In other words, if we had to put an example in that space, and this is why I'm saying you need to think about this and relate to what we're going through. With this direct instruction, can you see that I would be referring to my teaching phase in the lesson, because I'm specifically giving instructions of how the learner should be moving. So in other words, I am probably teaching this new skill, okay? But don't forget that you need to see that I could refer back to direct instruction or direct teaching by stopping all activity and saying, right, now we're getting back to having to analyze a movement that we've just learned. Right, so there's always this movement that you could have back to direct instruction. And you'll see as we go down that we then move into individual or partner practice. Now, this is interesting because here I could very well move away more to the indirect, almost informal, but it's just after my direct instruction. So now I'm suddenly getting them to move out into a space where they can use stations. So we've allocated our stations, we get our learners to go to those stations, and they're going to really be practicing. Is it not, question, is it not perhaps too soon to let them be on their own, almost? Or is the teacher, and we'll get to that when we do our demonstration supervision section, is it not too soon? Should we not wait a while? So these are things that I would like you to think about. When we move on to the movement exploration, here we have to understand that we're putting the learner in a position where they need to discover. What can my body do? Can I do a handstand? Can I flip over? Can I actually put myself in a position where I work with a team or work with a partner? Right. The teacher here is allowing the learner to explore, but the teacher here is still going to be determining when the learner is participating, how, and with who. And we can understand there that the learner will choose a buddy. We don't want necessarily a learner to choose a friend that is not quite the same size. So therefore, when we do the movement exploration is where the teacher will still make many of the decisions. When we look at cooperative activities, and it's awful to have to rush through these. When we look at cooperative activities, obviously here we are now wanting the learner to specifically work either with a partner or with a team. It must be very clear there, and yes, I am rushing. It must be very clear in that instance that the learners have to have social skills to be able to work together. If we look at the cooperative or the challenging activities, you can see now that we've moved away from the direct teaching to the indirect. We are letting go. We are now going to give the learners that opportunity where they have to discover whether they can or cannot do a new skill and how they would be either correcting themselves or assisting others to be corrected. And then, like I said, we move even closer. And like I said, these would be available for your PowerPoint on ECI. But if we had to look at the problem solving, this very much puts your learner in the same space as trying to overcome the challenge of a new activity, how am I going to figure out how to either work as a team? For example, I use the example here of an obstacle course, for example. Now I've taught my learners to crawl. I've taught them to jump. Now I've put this in an obstacle course. The learner is now put in a position of having to solve whether they can or cannot and how they are going to be jumping, crawling, and applying this new skill. Right, and in that way, we have now moved away from the direct teaching. Can you see that the teacher was the instructor and moved away to purely being the facilitator? You'll also see here that we keep having to then refer to demonstration, for example. We need to look at feedback. We need to look at supervision. All of these come into these teaching methods. And this is where I need you to see the link. These are always integrated. The way I'm going to be teaching is also having to consider things like supervision, things like feedback. Where am I going to do that? How am I going to do that? Why am I going to do it? To whom? And all of those, like I said, always interlink with each other. So now we look at demonstration. And having to unfortunately watch the time here, you will see that I have put on 2 video clips. But at this point, I'd rather from my visual demonstration, I would hear, and yes, I'm going to trust you. I want Montana and Waterfall and Musgrave. Where you are in the lecture hall, I'd like you to put your arms out to the side. Reach right up to the top. If you had to clap your hands above your head and then open the arms, my elbows are shoulder height. My arms are now going to go down. I'm going to clap against my hips. Can you see that I'm giving you specific instruction, a key word as to where your body is going to be, what body parts are being moved. So if I had to just slightly step back and not jump on the table here, but I need to teach the jumping jack. So now I'm going to have the learners and I have to exaggerate my movement. Otherwise, I'll have a very small movement from the learner. I have to exaggerate. I have to be big. You'll see the 2 clips. I used gallop and I used jumping jack. When you're demonstrating, you get out there bold and big, and you know exactly, excuse me, what the movement would look like. Okay, so you have to make sure, one, that your key words are very clear, because you'll see your demonstration will be going with a verbal instruction, obviously. But this is now where it's very important that from a time-saving point of view, we need to be short, concise. It needs to be instructive. I'm going to be big and bold. I need you to actually, where you are now, while you're watching, do a jumping jack. Come on, I'm watching. I'm watching. Jumping jack. Not even my panel is doing a jumping jack. Eish. Eish. Come on, panel. Okay. You need to be loud and clear. You need to be remembering, being very cognizant of your demonstration suiting your cognitive development level of the learner. You cannot use terminology that's going to be going straight over the head. You cannot use movements that they cannot interpret or relate with. It's straightforward. And you'll see many of the explanations of how we have to use verbal instruction sort of repeat each other, but they're emphasizing all the key factors that we have to consider when we are going to be instructing, when we're giving the verbal demonstration. You can link it to the content of other subjects that the learners can associate with. You can also link it with a previous activity, a previous skill that the learner can relate with. when we are doing verbal instruction, when we are doing demonstration, whether visual or verbal, maintain eye contact. And this is where the lecture hall to me and the field is important, because I'd like to show you, I'd like to make sure you're not having sunglasses outside on the field, right? You need to make that eye contact. That learner knows that you are relating to them specifically, not just as a whole. Right. And obviously you're going to be animating and you're going to exaggerate and you're going to explain clearly, but also then comes in listen. If your learner is experiencing a problem, just giving the verbal or the visual demonstration and you're not observing or listening to be able to fix them, that becomes a problem. Right. So now you won't be able, and this is the next phase where we get to, you won't be able to give feedback. You won't be able to correct a movement. Right. So listening is very much part of your verbal or the verbal experience that the learner will be getting from your demonstration. Okay. And obviously, I would repeat. So when I'm teaching the jumping jack, right, everybody, arms to the side, shoulder height, arms reach up, ears or elbows to the ears. Everybody drop the arms. Right, everybody again. Arms, shoulder height, elbows to the ears. Right, that is how big we're going to make our jumping jack. So I use repetition as well. Okay. Guys, please realize that I'd like you to put yourself on the field. I'd like you to feel yourself doing these or engaging in these explanations, these academic terminology on the field, because that's what it's about. That is what the learner should be experiencing. Like I said, the feedback and the supervision and the demonstration all link in to my teaching method, my teaching style, my teaching approach, okay? If we are going to be giving quality feedback, and this brings us, like I said, it links now with supervision, it links with my teaching style, my teaching strategy. We need to observe. If I don't observe, I will not be able to correct and give feedback and constructive feedback. If I don't know my skill, then I won't be able to provide quality feedback. So I need to know in your rubrics that you've done for your lessons, I need to know in my advanced column, what does the actual advanced learner or advanced movement look like? What are the shoulders doing? Where are the eyes? Are the knees straight? What are the feet doing? What are the positions? If I know my skill, if I observe my learner, I would be able to give quality feedback. Then it's a question of, now we have to look at, but now again, I want to jump the gun here. We need to be very mindful, like I said, of the body parts. I wanted to get to the end of the slide already. And we also need to be very aware of the ability of the learner as well. Can you remember what the objective of the lesson is? If I'm observing carefully, I'm obviously having to feed back, what was the topic of my lesson? What do I want to achieve from the skill? If you're mindful about that and you know your skill, can you see that your quality feedback is just going to be on target? We also have to now be careful, and there's a fine line, there's a gray area here about discussing correct and incorrect technique. Be very careful that we don't use the incorrect and then somehow little minds might get stuck on that. We need to make sure that they know correct specifically, but when we give them that feedback, that we then say, look, your shoulder or your elbow rather, let's get back to the jumping jack. Your elbow is now bent next to the ear. I wanted it straight. So I'm referring to the incorrect, but I'm also making very sure that I'm focusing on the correct technique that is required. Then we have to be aware as well, when we correcting, make sure that the main correction is done first. So there might be many faults that the learner or even the group would be doing. Everybody would be bending the elbows. So we correct the elbows first, because without straight elbows in the jumping jack, and I'm using a really, really random example, then the jumping jack is not going to be executed properly. So we don't get the heart rate up. Can you see how I'm getting back to the objective, right? And then we correct the legs, and then we correct the upper body, etc. So depending on the objective of the lesson, we will obviously work on the most important one. You need to be consistent, you need to be very specific, and you need to give that immediately. If you are not providing the feedback immediately, it's lost in interpretation. You need to make sure that the learners understand at that point why the movement is incorrect and how they can correct it. So it has to be immediate. If we look at a few questions that add to that, who needs the feedback? Do I give it to an individual or do I provide it to a group? Can I then say, right, I see everybody not doing the arms correctly. Let's all come back to the middle. Let's perform that movement again. Then I see, right, only one individual or two, I could pull them aside and I could then repeat with them. So you have to, can you see that you're now actually looking at the observe factor? If you observe, you would be able to then gauge whether you are teaching or giving feedback to the individual or the whole group again. Who provides this feedback? Obviously, the teacher and the peers within the class can be doing that. And that would be, obviously, extrinsic feedback and motivation when we get to that at some point. Then the learner has to experience this movement themselves to be able intrinsically to decide, right, I would be able to do this better if I do it in this and this way. I am watching the time and thinking that we have to push on. When we do cut off, please make sure that you can watch the video on ECI as well. And that you would be able to post more questions to each and every individual lecturer as well on the different campuses. Quickly getting back to the feedback. When it's provided, we have indicated, how is it provided? All these kind of questions I would want to pose to you a case study and say, right, this is what's busy happening on the field. How do I now give feedback? Who do I give it to? In this specific scenario, what would you as the teacher do to be able to correct the skill of, for example, the forward roll, right? And knowing, of course, your skill there is going to be vital. Rushing a little bit through the supervision. Obviously, for supervision, guys, the most important thing is here that you understand it's about control. And we need to be very aware here. We don't want to be little soldiers, and we don't want to take the fun factor out of our lesson. You are supervising in a way so that you can give feedback. You are supervising in a way that you can control, that you can guide, that you can facilitate for the next movement to happen, the next station to happen. And this is where I've not even included here how we would be doing. And if you refer to the next or the pages in that where you use organizational routines, I haven't even included that. Those organizational routines will come into this control, would come into the supervision, will come into your planning, of course, as well. Very important that you move around, that you scan constantly. You need to be aware of everything going on around you and the learners. There's always a safety factor. I hate having to rush. If we look at these classroom formations, we're looking at scattered, for example, we're looking at semicircles and lines, we're looking at double circles, we're looking at single circle formation. Here, you need to understand, I would have liked to spend time on seeing what the position of that teacher is. Why is the teacher in that position? What benefits are there for the teacher to be in that position specifically, to be able to get her objective of the lesson in? And of course, I've added here rows and columns that weren't in the previous ones, or partners. If partners are scattered, where do you place yourself in this space that the learners are in? Now, yes, now really rushed, I hit that. If you look at the questions, I'd like you to spend time on these and see how you would use the information that we've very much rushed through and answer these questions in your own time. Relate them to a position that you would be in. Right. At this point, I'd like everybody to jump up and do a jumping jack. And I can, out of the, 48 participants plus the panel, like to actually know that Big Brother is watching you to do that. I'd actually want you to do a forward roll as well. There, just not on the bed. Guys, with this in mind, please be aware next week we'll do questions and answers specifically, have them ready. If there are any Warwick at the moment that actually popped out as well, I'm hoping we would be able to see the 160 in our next session so that we can really bash through chapter 7 and all the things that we've left out. Remember, in all these sessions, when we cut out, you can refer back to ECI as well. The panel, Montana, Ms. Markgraaf, anything that you want to add? I should have asked in between the rushing.
No, Brenda, I think you did good. I think you covered most of it. So I look forward to the students' responses and questions next week.
I do hope they would, yes, interrogate the whole session, and especially the ones that unfortunately couldn't make it. I'm not going to say they deliberately didn't because they were still in bed. Mrs. Human, anything from your side, please?
No, it's well done to all of you.
Right, we did miss Waterfall there. Guys, like I said, if there are any questions, I haven't seen any on here, and I see no chats either. If I had to ask Warwick, our learning event director, those students that are not aware of this yet, there's a director that normally assists us from a technical point of view. Warwick, is there anything from your side? Any questions that have
Brenda,
popped up that I'm not picking up?
There are no questions on YouTube at all. I've been sitting on here the entire time.
Oh my word. That
Okay,
means I either spoke too quickly or our students are still getting comfortable with a space.
Look at it on the positive side, Brenda. You clearly explained everything, that there were no questions needed.
Oh heck, even if it's at pace.
All right, but I just want to say thank you to Ronelle for keeping an eye on the chat section. That was very, very good move on your part. She was able to post and respond to some questions and pop out some links and that, which is very, very great. I really do appreciate that.
Excellent, thank you. That I didn't know because I can't see.
Yeah.
Right. Guys, that's it from my side, and I think, Warwick, we are right on time.
I think you are, yes. I'm just putting up my screen just to say thank you to the students for watching. So I just want to say thank you to everyone from PES and to the students. Please remember that the link is on ECR for the YouTube. So if you want to go back and refer to it, it will be there and it's not going to disappear.
And it's in our specific block on our page, correct?
That is correct. Hold on, wait 1 second. I see we have one question and answer. Oh, it's just a student saying thank you. I was getting excited for you, but it's just a thank you message.
Oh, yes. Thanks, Sarishan.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much. And panel, we'll probably chat soon anyway.
All right. See yous.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.